And just a quick note for everyone in the call, we will have the chat open for about the first 10 minutes, just so everyone can say hello, because I know we're normally used to being in a regular format meeting where you can see everybody and say good morning and all of those things. But we'll leave the chat open for a couple minutes for about the first 10. And then what we're going to do is through the webinar today at the end, we will have an opportunity for questions from the group. So please put them into the Q&A. So at about 10 after 11, we will shut down the chat function, but the Q&A function will remain open. And we have the team here at the national office that will be reviewing all the questions and sending them over so that we can get your questions to our panelists as well. Last thing to note before I hand it over to Linda, we do have a third panelist. She is just unfortunately behind an accident in traffic. So when you do see another person pop into the call, it is expected, and we will just loop her into the questions that we've got going. So we will get started because we've got a lot of questions and a lot of things to talk about over the next hour. So I'll pass it over to Linda.
Good morning. Bonjour tout le monde. Welcome to our panel this morning. I would like to start by acknowledging that we are situated on the unceded territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin people. The theme of our panel this morning touches on the CFUW AGM theme for this year, Women Standing Strong, Les Femmes Debout et Solidaires. And we will be discussing Canadian women in politics and understanding how to support one another. Over to you, Jamie, to tell us a little bit about our speakers today.
So, as I mentioned earlier, we do have 3 speakers joining us today. Dr. Rachel Loan Walker is a community researcher, strategist, and facilitator with over 20 years of leadership experience across not-profit, academic, and policy sectors. She is the co-founder of Alchemy Group, where she works with nonprofits and social impact organizations, and previously served as the executive director of Out Saskatoon, held the Ariel F. Sallows Chair in Human Rights at the College of Law, and most recently was program chair of Gender, Sexualities, and Social Justice in Political Studies at the University of Saskatchewan. Most recently, she ran as an NDP candidate for the federal election in Saskatoon West. We also have Pam Damoff. So Pam Damoff is the CEO of the Pearson Centre, a progressive Canadian think tank. She served as MP from Oakville, North Burlington from 2015 to 2025. Known for championing health research, Kira's Law, and cross-party collaboration. She served as vice chair of the Status of Women Committee and parliamentarian secretary to the Ministers of Health, Indigenous Services, Public Safety, and Foreign Affairs. A former Oakville town councillor and financial sector professional, she is passionate about ending gender-based violence. And lastly, Christina M. Smith is the mayor of Westmount, elected in 2017 and re-elected in 2021. She serves on multiple Montreal agglomeration commissions and is the executive of the Association of Suburban Municipalities. Previously, she held roles with Coca-Cola and the federal government, and Christina is a dedicated community leader, mother of 3, and holds a degree in political science from Bishop's University. So I'd like to welcome our speakers today. Again, as I noted, we will hopefully have a third one popping in at some point. But what I would like to do is start us into our questions. So who helped or mentored you and gave you the nudge to get you into politics? And we'll start with Rachel.
Hello, everyone. I'm really excited to be here. I'm joining from Treaty 6 territory in Saskatoon. So I am old to studying politics, but new to actually running. And so I just ran for the first time in this last federal election. But I wanted to say in this question, the story that women are asked 7 times before they say yes, that is true. And I can say from experience. And so it was many years of working in community and being asked to run at different points and always feeling like maybe there was someone better, maybe there was someone else. And so the reason why this time I said yes was actually because my current partner was a former MLA in Alberta. And so my partner is Esteban Cortez Vargas. And that actually really shifted the question for me, because all of a sudden I had full access to someone who could demystify the process for me and explain to me why it's exactly, people like me, people like us that should be running. And so that made a big difference and really gave me the nudge. And so then when I got a call from it was actually a woman that I sat on the board of the United Way here in Saskatoon, Myrna, I'll give a shout out to her. And so she called me and asked me to run, and this time I didn't say no. And this time I really took it seriously. And so it did take a really, really long time, and it took having some strong supporters and access to a lot of information to be able to take that leap.
Perfect. Thank you, Pam.
Yeah, I mean, what Rachel said is absolutely true, and kudos to you for putting your name forward. It's a great experience whether you win or you lose. So I mean, the first time I ran was for municipal council, and I didn't really have anybody that nudged me to run. I just had been really involved in the community and thought that I could do more from the inside than the outside. First time I ran, I lost, and then I ran again in 2010. But running federally, it was actually a call from John McCallum to see if I would consider running in Oakville, North Burlington. But to Rachel's point, I didn't say yes right away, and I know men do, right? Like it's like, you want me to run? Yeah, sure. And so, I was talking to some people, and then finally it was a friend of mine who at the time was the provincial member of parliament for Oakville, and he said, "Why are you even thinking about it? Like, what have you got to lose by running?" And so I did, and it was the best decision um, I've made. Like, it was just incredible. And I do encourage people to run. There was a woman though who had been on Oakville Town Council that her name was Kathy Graham, and she was a real mentor for me when I first entered politics, and when I first got elected municipally, I was really frustrated with the way things went. And I remember really clearly calling her from the parking lot before a council meeting, and I was crying. And she said, "Look, you always stick to your principles and your values, even if nobody is agreeing with you, because at the end of the day, you can lay your head on the pillow and know that you haven't compromised your own values. And eventually, other people will start to feel uncomfortable, and they'll come away around to your way of thinking." And she was absolutely right. So I never forgot that advice, though, to really stick to your guns. And she was a really incredible woman.
All right, thank you very much. Our next question, can you tell us a little bit about the challenges of being a woman in politics? Maybe we'll start with you, Rachel.
Um, in terms of this one, right? I had a very strong and joyful team, and so the campaign, I mean, I can say, as you said, Pam, it is so much fun. I mean, for anyone listening that is scared of running, it's actually really, really incredible. And so I had a strong and joyful team, and that drowns out a lot of the negativity. You wrap yourself with people who are just excited and committed and so supportive, and that goes such a long way. We know that wrapping yourself with community makes the work very possible. Um, but there is invisible labor. There definitely is the invisible labor of constantly proving legitimacy, especially as a queer woman. For myself, I navigated that in different ways. There's an emotional calculus on every door, at every event. Kind of, should I say this? Should I say that? Maybe I'll frame it this way this time. And so that definitely went on. But I am very happy to say that I didn't experience any overt discrimination, probably behind closed doors. But I'm grateful for that, and I think that times are changing in that respect. But I want to say there was a moment during this last election when they first put up all of the leaders of the parties. And it was when the initial five set for the leadership debate. And I just remember seeing that picture of all five leaders, and they were all men. And my soul just fell in that moment, even though I knew that. I knew I was very, very aware of what was happening. But I just had this really clear moment of deep disappointment that all of the work that we're doing, and yet still at the leadership level, there's such an absence of women in those roles. And so that I carried that with me as well. And we know that, leadership is as important as representation at all levels.
Absolutely. I can't, it's heartbreaking for many of us, I think, when we see all the pictures, and it's mostly white middle-aged men who are in all the photos. So Pam, Christina hasn't had a chance to join us yet. So could you tell us about your challenges now?
Yeah, I don't want to scare people by talking about it, but I do think it's important to recognize some of the challenges that are out there. And I mean, I didn't run in the last election because of the toxic nature that politics has become, with threats and both online. I mean, I've had online nonsense since I first got elected federally. In fact, I remember one of my colleagues, Sean Fraser, saying that he would get attacked on social media, but it was always about policy. It wasn't personal. And women are treated differently. I found, though, after COVID, people became bolder, angrier, and more aggressive. And so I was out grocery shopping and on my own, walking down the aisle 7 o'clock at night, and a man just starts screaming at me, swearing, saying that I should be hung, that should be convicted for treason. And it was really disconcerting. And those kind of things started happening more often. And I just got to the point where I just didn't want to keep doing it. So when I told the Prime Minister I wasn't running again, and I said, I am going to talk about why, I'm not going to say that it's just to spend more time with family. He encouraged me to do that. And I was really heartened by the outpouring of support. And I think it's an isolated incident in what happens. It's predominantly women and racialized men. So Jagmeet Singh, for example, the leader of your party, Rachel, certainly was a target. I think of somebody like Omar Al-Ghabra in my caucus, who was constantly being attacked. But for women in politics, it's very real, and the threats are around rape, sexual assaults. They go beyond just sort of what you see in the media. But I think as Canadians, we need to start calling that out. I think, we need to talk about it more, but we also need to call it out because people have been bullied into silence, and they're afraid to say anything and I think when we do that, the bullies sort of take over. And if you'd allow me to give a plug to Marianne Mead Ward, the mayor of Burlington, who approached me right away and said, what can I do? And she has started a pledge that all politicians can sign, women and men, and it's called Elect Respect. And if you sign that pledge, you pledge to treat other colleagues, if you're elected, or candidates with respect. And I really give kudos to her for starting it. The Canadian Association of Feminist Parliamentarians has also taken up her call. So you can check it out. It's electrespect.ca, I believe.
Thank you very much. And thank you for sharing. We know that we wanted to make sure that question was incorporated. We do, as you know, our questions kind of take a little bit more of a positive spin, but we did want to give everyone that oversight of what the climate actually is, because that's something that we're currently living in, and we don't necessarily see it on the ground level, but you might have. So I do really appreciate both of you sharing in that respect. But for the next one, in your view, what does meaningful support for women in politics look like, both from individuals and institutions? And we'll start with Pam.
So a couple of things. A lot of times in political parties, women are put forward in ridings where they can't win. And so, you know, a party will say, well, we ran X percentage of women. And the percentage of women that ran in the last election was actually down. And it was down quite a bit. Now, we managed to almost maintain the percentage in the House of Commons. But the number of women who put their name forward, and I know when I was talking to a reporter about that, I said you should check and see whether there are ridings where the women can actually win, because a lot of times parties will put their strong candidates, or sorry, strong ridings, they will put men into that riding. Candidates also need financial support, and women don't always have the same kind of networks that men have to be able to raise money. It's a challenge, and it costs a lot of money to run an election campaign. Canada has really strict rules on donations, as we should, and I'm quite proud of them. But you know, you can't have one benefactor who's going to, or a lobby group. It has to be individuals. There's a maximum amount of, I think it's now $1,700. So anytime that an institution like a political party can have a fund, I know I benefited from the Judy LaMarche Fund when I ran in 2015, and it made a huge difference to get an influx of several $1,000s into my riding just before election day to be able to do things that we would not have been able to afford. And then having supportive friends and family and volunteers. And I know, you know, we were talking about how much fun election campaigns are. They really are. And I've always felt you need to make sure that everybody on your campaign is enjoying themselves, and that as the candidate, you're equal with everybody else. You're not better than them. You are, you won't win without a strong team, and you know, to treat them with the respect that you deserve. So I think all of that is really important if you do put your name forward.
Perfect. Thank you, Rachel.
Yeah, absolutely. That's wonderful. And so I'll kind of extend on mentorship, resources, support. Pam spoke to those really well. And so the only thing I would add is that I think it also means providing the analysis. So actually talking about why this is happening, talking about some of the stats, right, of numbers of women, sharing that information. That helps people understand really what's going on. I think it's not enough to say anymore, we support you, we'll be here for you when it goes bad. I think we have to have a greater understanding of, you know, why it's happening and how to respond. And that's something I know that there are some organizations doing that kind of work, but I would love to see a toolkit that has a list of, okay, so if this is happening online, here are things that your team can do, actions that your team can do, ways that your team can go and alter the narrative. Because, for example, I didn't know that you could just delete comments. There's a lot of misinformation about even how to navigate social media out there. And I think that we don't always know what we can do. And yes, you can delete terrible comments, you can block people. And so really providing people with the tools and the resources and the explicit strategies that they can use and that their teams can use to combat the onslaught of especially online vitriol. So that's what I would add to that piece. I see that Christina has joined us.
Yes. Hi, Christina.
I'm
welcome.
so sorry that I'm late, but
Not
I'm
a
here.
problem.
I'm here.
Everyone knew you were going to jump in. So I'll repeat the question and we'll get you to jump in on this one. So in your view, what does meaningful support for women in politics look like, both from individuals and institutions?
So, hi, welcome everybody. I think that's a great question. And for those who don't know, I'm on the municipal level of politics. So I'm the mayor of Westmount, which is a small city within a large city, the city of Montreal. And I think there's what we're seeing in municipal politics. It's a little bit different than federal and provincial. Obviously, federal and provincial, it's the onslaught of online commentary, online hate. All of that is is exploding, right? And the misinformation explodes with that. But the difference, especially for smaller cities at the municipal level, is you then see them on the street. You know, I've just recently experienced this where, you know, someone wrote these sort of hateful comments about me. And, you know, within that afternoon, I'm standing in the grocery store lineup on Sherbrooke Street, and lo and behold, there they are. So it's, I think that's becoming a major deterrent for women, in particular, entering the municipal field or feeling more of an impact of that in the municipal field. And I think we just have to, there has to be so much more education around, you know, sort of what's valuable conversation, what's valuable feedback, how do we, and it's not to say you don't want to listen to your residents, you absolutely need to do that, you need to have that open dialogue, but far too many times it's crossing a line. And I think the first people to say I'm out when it crosses that line are women, right? For all sorts of reasons, for safety reasons. You know, I've had issues where, you know, my 11-year-old was being harassed on the street. He was the person had sort of had a long history with harassment with the city, with us. And he was arrested and then, you know, sort of dropped in court. But that's the first thing as a mom, someone's going to say, well, no, thanks. Like that's, I'm going to contribute to my community, but in a different way than that. So I think we need to have so much more education on that, and just to help more people in this. And we are seeing a mass exodus in Quebec in particular from municipal politics. Just in this cycle alone, I think 800 municipal politicians did not fulfill the whole mandate, which is a huge number. You might say that we have too many municipal politicians, but that's a whole other discussion. But it's there's something there, and we would be unwise to not try and fix this problem, and to really try and get back to a much more civil discourse where you can just disagree with someone without hating them. And I think fundamentally that's where we need to get back to. And I see a lot of women leading on that they're not engaging in that sort of nasty sort of rhetoric. But it's definitely tough. It's tough when you know the people, and you know the people, you know, launching that. But I've certainly benefited from a lot of women supporting me. And, you know, I grew up with, so my mom, who was a president of one of your chapters, I grew up with a very, very strongly opinion mother who was always engaged in politics. And, you know, I think it also comes from there as well, just wanting to give back to your community. And I think that should be fully supported by women out there. So
Could I add something to what Christina was saying? Is that okay? Police services across the country need to take these issues seriously, and they don't. And it doesn't matter whether it's in Halton Region where I live, or Ottawa, or Westmount, or wherever. I hear repeatedly that when we go to the police, they just don't take it seriously. And I remember the RCMP commissioner being interviewed on CBC, or not the commissioner, but the woman who was in charge of threats against politicians, saying, well, they're awful but lawful. And I remember thinking, well, then if it's lawful to have someone stalking you who you know is a gun owner, and you don't want to talk, the police don't want to talk to that individual, or the things, you know, we were talking about Jagmeet Singh earlier, but the things that was happening with him, and things that were happening in Ottawa with the protesters who were following MPs of all parties across the street. It's actually really troubling, the response from police services. And having called, I don't know if Christina has, but it tends to be, well, what do you want us to do about it? And that's not acceptable. They're the experts. And we do want to be accessible to constituents, but we also want to make sure that our families and ourselves are safe. So thanks for letting me add on to that.
I think that's a huge factor in this, because if people don't feel like their families are safe, they're not going to engage in this. And it's not to say that, you know, your families aren't safe, but there's too many stories of incidents.
Well, thank you very much, Pam, for jumping in with that comment. It's quite, and it's very nice to see you, Christina Smith. Thank you for making it this morning. Your mom is a very strong personality. I'm from the Montreal Lakeshore University Women's Club, so very nice to have you here joining us. We're going to move on to question number 4. How can we encourage a greater diversity of women to be involved in political life at the local and grassroots level? Why don't we start with Rachel?
I'm probably the least experienced in this one, but I'll start us off. My thoughts on this one is really to make the invitation explicit. Sometimes in those nomination committees, and I have seen this happen again and again, you know, there's an initial ask, but there isn't the follow-up, there isn't answering the questions, and then building in the support around that. So it's not just about opening the doors. It's really about going out and inviting women who haven't seen themselves reflected in those spaces, ask them again and again and again, and ensure that they have also access to the tools. And so that's the other piece, provide the tools. And so that means running campaign schools off, you know, out of election cycles, training, workshops, discussions, bringing in speakers, all of that kind of stuff. It often starts to happen close to campaign periods. But if it's happening well in advance, if that's an ongoing process, then people are, by the time it comes to making the decision to seek a nomination or to run, they already know, oh, I know how to do this. And I know who to ask, right? Back to Pam's point about women not always having the same networks. All of a sudden they do, because they've been involved in a community of support for a long time already. And then people can kind of coalesce around different candidates and know that they've got a team behind them. That's my thoughts on that one.
Those are very good points. Pam, would you like to jump in?
Yeah, I think, you know, speaking about sort of the circle of support that Rachel was talking about, I think in Halton Region, we had women who were elected at all levels of government come together a few times a year just to support one another. And it was really helpful for everybody. So that goes all the way from school board trustee to MP. Not everybody could make it each time. I also think when you're a candidate, you need to make sure that your campaigns are a safe place for all volunteers. A lot of times you have young men and women who come out to volunteer, and you know, maybe they're in high school or university, and you need to make sure that everyone feels safe and supported, not just within like the campaign group, but also you're knocking on doors, which can be incredibly intimidating, and it's also very vulnerable. So things like making sure volunteers know to stay in teams of 2 and stay together as a group. It's too easy to get separated. And so making sure, because, you know, it's going to be the young woman who's volunteering who's going to get targeted, or you know, I've had it happen on my campaigns, or I had a young racialized man. A young man who was originally from Syria volunteering, who got attacked at the door. You need to make not physically attacked, verbally abused, but you need to make sure that you've got systems in place to make sure, because you want, hopefully, some of those young women that come out to volunteer on a campaign have fun and get involved and really enjoy it, and are more likely eventually to put their name forward, whether it's municipally or federally, even if it is for a political party. And I always would encourage young people to get involved municipally, because, you know, find somebody that you like. There's no political party, at least in my community, there's no political party involved. So they can just work for someone that they believe in, and those issues are so close to home when they're municipal issues. So would be my advice.
It's interesting how we're all women here talking today, and we're thinking about the other people around us and their safety, not necessarily your own safety. So that's I like that perspective as well. Christina, would you like to add some thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with all of those, especially in terms of the campaigning and getting young people involved, but making sure they feel included and safe to do it is such an important factor. And you know, things have certainly changed in my community. When I became mayor, I was the youngest mayor ever elected to the city of Westmount. And at that time, at all three levels of government, there were three men all over the age of 70 that had been in place for a long time. And now there's a complete shift, and it's Anna Gainey's our federal MP, Jennifer Macron's our provincial MNA. I have the first female director general ever of the city of Westmount. And so it has changed, and it has changed and I would say the way we work, I mean, we work so closely together, all three levels. It helps that we all also really get along and are kind of that we share the same values, and we're, all raising kids sort of within the same age. And but it's really important to have that team in place and those volunteers. And municipal government is a great way for people to be involved, and a great way for, young, old, and everyone else in between, because those issues do matter. And it's whether that's seniors programming or the hockey program or how we're going to manage our, outdoor sports facilities, all of it kind of touches every aspect of life. So it is a great place to be involved, but you need a team, and nobody wins an election alone. And it's incredibly important to have a strong team. So I'm not running again, but I am helping a candidate who is running, and she's amazed. She's like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize I would need this big of a team. And I was like, you've got it. You've got that team. Don't worry. But nobody does anything alone in politics on any level.
That's great. Sorry, that's great. Thank you. So the next questioner is, what are effective ways for individuals and groups to advance causes at the grassroots level and influence political agendas? We'll start with Christina this time.
Well, that's an easy way to do it municipally, because you are very accessible. It's the level of government where citizens come to the council meetings and get to pose questions directly to the elected officials, as opposed to opposition parties doing it, things like that. So there's lots of ways to be involved in it. And I would say, if you're interested in and you want to make change, go to a city council meeting, ask the question, get it on people's radar that it's important to you. And there are big changes coming from municipalities. Like, this is the first time sort of in my memory that I can remember a prime minister consistently, with almost every speech that he gives, addressing the housing issue. The housing issue unfolds at the municipal level. That's where the houses actually get built. And all the provincial leaders are saying the same thing, but those issues cause an enormous amount of stress and uncertainty within the communities, right? And you often see it's at the municipal level where you get the pushback on that housing issue. But I'd say there's some big challenges that we have in this country right now, huge challenges. And this prime minister federally has been given a mandate to address those challenges, but it will roll out everywhere. So get on people's agenda, ask the questions at a council meeting, and you will be heard. There's no way that a council is not going to listen to you in a question period of something that's really important to you, and then gather others that might feel the same way, and try and find a solution. And I think for the most part, you'll find willing participants in municipal elected officials that just want for good, and keep building their communities.
Sounds great. Thank you. Pam?
So, yeah, I mean, reaching out to elected officials in a respectful way is certainly going to be a lot better to get, what you want. I mean, my sort of big start in my community was when they were going to close the local pool. And so I got involved rallying the community to keep the pool open, and going to council meetings, and working with our local councillors. But I mean, even as a federal MP, people would come to me. I remember one quite clearly was a woman who was not from my riding, and she reached out on Twitter, back when all of us used Twitter a lot more often, I guess. But her daughter Kira had been killed just north of me at Rattlesnake Point by her father, and Jennifer reached out to me to see if there was any way to get the federal government to pass a law for education for federal judges. And I ended up having a call with her. I worked with her. Her own MP had never responded to her. and worked with her to get a private member's bill, which is called Kira's Law, passed. And, you know, just having conversations with people. But I think in Jennifer's case, she had tried and the MP hadn't responded, so she didn't give up, and she just kept reaching out to people in any way that she could. And I'm, you know, I feel really blessed to have been able to work with her and make a difference that hopefully it was to educate judges around domestic violence and coercive control, because in her case, the judge acknowledged that the father had been abusive to Jennifer, but said that doesn't necessarily make him a bad dad. And then he proceeded to take his 4-year-old daughter and jump off a cliff with her and kill them both. So, you know, respectful dialogue. Sometimes people don't agree with you, whether it's about, I was on municipal council for 5 years. So whether it's about snow plowing of a street and it not being done in time, or something as significant as what I dealt with Jennifer, when you approach people in a respectful way, and as elected officials, I think we have to listen to people who do have differences of opinion with us, and let them have a voice, because it may change how you actually think about an issue if you take the time to listen to people.
Thank you. Rachel?
I think this builds on what Pam and Christina have shared, and at what I found really effective at the grassroots level is clarity of intent and then strategic coalition building. And so get very clear about what it is that you want to do, right? Sometimes we think, well, we want to fix everything, but choosing one thing and working on that really makes a big difference. And then get the people in the room that are directly connected to that. So an example, this is an example at the provincial level that wasn't quote unquote successful, kind of in the grand scheme of things, but was very valuable. So it was around bubble legislation around an abortion clinic in Saskatoon. And so what happened was we got the organization, Saskatoon Sexual Health, an organization, on board. We had an elected official, provincial MLA, on board, and then people with lived experience, right? So you need the government relations, you need a strong community advocate, you need a policy expert. So we got some law students to write the policy. And then they wrote, and so they wrote a private member's bill that was never passed, but it was really effective in the educational aspect. And so they built a campaign, started a petition, were able to do this big push of awareness around this gap in, you know, maybe we have access, but we actually don't have the protections for women who are accessing that space. And it was really powerful in the community, right? And it shows very specific action, get the right people, and communicating it. It's not enough always to do the work. You have to be able to show the impact of that. And so I always say, don't underestimate storytelling, right? Pair the policy with lived experience, because then even if maybe it doesn't find its way through government in the way that you want it to, it has huge impact in the community, and it made a big difference for that organization in terms of the support and the funding that they now receive. And so that's the heart and strategy have to travel together.
You might see me in the background furiously writing notes, and I just want you to know that I'm sure there are many ladies who are listening in today, especially in our education and advocacy committees, who are taking notes, because it's going to, what we're saying here today is going to help to drive probably what we're doing in the next couple of years. So some very good points. Thank you very much for that. And something else that's very dear to our hearts lately is, and after watching the elections unfold, how do we raise a generation of men who are allies and advocates who can understand, support, and advocate for women in leadership? Because we can't do this alone, right? We all need to be working together. So maybe we'll start with Pam.
Yeah, you know, I thought about this question a lot, and I don't really have a good answer, because I see us going backwards in so many ways. There's such a pushback. Some of it valid, to be honest with you, but there's such a pushback to gender equity and gender equality right now. and it's predominantly young white men who are growing up feeling excluded. And I think we have done a bad job of explaining why it's not exclusion, it's actually inclusion. It's making the economy better, it's making society better. And someone recently gave me the example that when there is pushback, to ask people if they ever use the accessible button when they're going into a building. And all of us say yes, or most of us will. And then you can say, but that was put there as an accommodation for people with disabilities, but it benefits everybody in society. It's a very simple example. So I think we need to be ensuring that particularly young men are feeling included, and there's an education piece to why this is good, why there are better decisions made. You know, we tend to just say, well, it's the right thing to do without explaining why, that it actually grows the economy when you have women who are in elected office. Would we have a national childcare program had we not had a woman as finance minister? I don't know, but I remember how excited I was. I mean, Christina, you're in Quebec, you've had that forever. But being in Ontario, you know, it was a big deal. And it's not only good for women who wanted to go back to work after having a baby, it actually grows GDP in Canada by doing that, right? So having women run, we need to make sure people understand why that's important. And I will say there are a number of allies out there. And I would cite our former Prime Minister, who was quite vocal on this. I was really disappointed when our current Prime Minister dropped the Minister for Women and Gender Equality. And I think CFUW signed on to the letter that was done back in March. But you know, it's really important that we do have men. And even things like pictures. I think, Rachel, you mentioned that earlier. Someone did, how the pictures, it's always the guys. We need to ensure that not token representation, but when there's a woman who's done a lot of work on a file or on an issue, that she's included when an announcement is made and not just shuffled off to the side. So I'll maybe leave it there.
Those are very good points. All right, Christina, would you like to comment?
I'll just add on. I mean, I agree with all the points that were raised there, but I also think it's so important that all these levels of government and every boardroom and wherever it may be reflects society, which means that women are at the table. Women are part of the decision-making process. I was part of that first generation of women that really benefited from the extended parental leave program in Quebec. It was 2007 when they did the full year, and if you know, and at the time I was working for a major corporation, and it worked in that business because it was actually easier to try and backfill my role on a longer period as opposed to these 3-month stints. And I worked for at the time I was working for Coca-Cola, where it was unheard of. They were like, sorry, where are you going? What is happening? I had colleagues in the US I had a colleague in the US who worked at global headquarters, had given birth to twins. So she had to go on 6 weeks of bed rest at the end of her pregnancy, delivered 2 healthy babies, but twins, which is a massive undertaking, and was back at work at 6 weeks. And her children were in the daycare, which kind of ate up her entire salary that was provided by Coca-Cola, like on the campus there. But it's just to even, and I remember watching this before I'd had my own children, and then when I had a child, I was unfathomable to me that I was working for a corporation that was expecting this of women. That at 6 weeks she had these, you know, tiny in a daycare, and she was sort of sitting at her desk half the day, you know, with her head down, tears into her keyboard. But it was, we've benefited, like my generation of women have really benefited from this extended parental leave. And I think it's been much better for the working environment as well. So, but we do need women at all the decision-making tables. And I think I hope that society is coming around to that's not it's not an anomaly anymore to have women in these leadership roles. But there's certainly many spots where we have not broken through to that glass ceiling.
Absolutely. Rachel, would you like to
Absolutely. And
speak?
I'll talk about this actually based on my experience teaching gender studies. So I've taught gender studies for 20 years, and I get this kind of beautiful access to, 18 to 22-year-olds. And I would say that I have far more men in my classrooms now than I did at the beginning. And so that's something that I like to share that because we think there's definitely a backlash. I full, fully recognize that and know that that's working. But there's a lot more queer men, of course, but a lot more diverse genders in my classrooms. But what I think one of the best ways that I have found is actually to really narrow in on the fact that men are also impacted negatively by patriarchal systems and just be really explicit about that. This supposed crisis of boys, and I put that in quotation marks, because that's what is being used to fuel a lot of the backlash. It does truly point to difficulties, gaps, and barriers, but it's not at the hands of girls succeeding. And we have to break down the fact that they're linking those two things together. It's at the hands of not having role models in a new gendered landscape. It's at the hands of, men and boys are as impacted by the strict boundaries of masculinity as women are impacted by strict boundaries of femininity, right? And so the role, kind of what we expect from men and boys, has been very static with really problematic expectations, and that needs to change. We really need to reframe allyship as also liberation, freedom, expansion of experience for boys and men, and not as a loss. And so that's one thing and that always works kind of with this. That's why I feel, kind of getting them at that age, and the boys, the men in my classrooms appreciate that because they too feel really squeezed by what is expected of them. And so showing that actually it is by working together and creating more freedom around gender that everybody wins.
Thank you. Yes, thank you very much. We are running out of time, actually, not surprisingly. It's this wonderful conversation. But I did just want to note that we've had some really good comments and questions come in through the chat. So I did just want to speak to a couple of them that popped up before I go to a couple other questions. So your advice, going in pairs and being mindful of young canvassers, is great advice. Very much appreciate that. I read that Margaret Atwood recently asked two rhetorical questions. What are men afraid of and what are women afraid of? And the answers she gave were that men are afraid of women laughing at them, and then the women are afraid of being killed. And then, so we've got tons of questions coming in, so I will try to get a couple of them in here. What do you think is the most important factor in getting a woman candidate elected? Party support, money, specific issue, volunteers, personal profile? I'll start with Christina.
I'd say it's probably all of those things. And certainly you have to start out with, why are you doing it? Why do you want to serve? What do you want to accomplish? And that would be the foundation of any campaign. And then you need to get a team together that, shares that passion and wants to help you get elected. And it takes a lot of work. Campaigns are enormous. As I'm sure Pam will attest to, it is 7 days a week, 20 hours a day. And it doesn't matter what level you're doing on. It is nonstop a campaign. And so it will take a lot of support to do it. I think in Canada, obviously it takes money. I think we are blessed in that we have a different system compared to the United States, where it's obviously candidates are essentially bought and owned by different interest groups. But it takes all of those things combined and a willingness to step up and serve your community. And it is one of the most rewarding experiences. We talk a lot about it being, difficult and toxic and all of these things. There's so many incredible, things that I could point to that we've been able to accomplish, or where we feel we've moved the city forward or helped someone, whether it's big or small. And so it really is a privilege to serve your neighbors, your fellow citizens.
Thank you, Rachel.
I'm muted.
So,
I I don't know that I would add more to that other than say yes,
Yeah.
it is all of those things. And just I'm going to circle back. I think Pam made this comment earlier, but just to highlight kind of the awareness that it's actually we really do need to focus on the nomination level, because she mentioned that women get run in ridings where there's not a chance of winning, right? And so we need to pay attention not just to who representation doesn't just mean, oh, good, we have 50% women running. Yes, but where are they running? And also at the nomination level, I've seen instances where we're riding everybody on the nomination, everyone in the nomination race is a racialized candidate. And that is we have to do better than that, right? I mean, that's wonderful, but it means then that there ends up being a lot of lateral violence that's happening right there, or at the nomination level, it's very strategically positioned so that women in those roles are not competitive. And so anyway, we need to pay attention to who is at the nomination level, and then also where people are running and where they are representing their communities. And I know that's tough sometimes for parties to be that focused, but we have to do better in terms of ensuring that representation is meaningful and not performative.
Perfect. Thank you, Pam.
Great. So I'm getting new internet put in. So if you see someone walking in behind me, that's why. The money, a lot of the things that happen when you run is you need confidence to ask people for money. You need confidence to go out and knock on doors. And I would say the asking the money for me anyway was the hardest. And it was easy asking for it for other people, when I had volunteered or for a cause. I organized the Terry Fox Run here in Oakville, and I've been involved. I have no problem asking people for money for that. But to ask for me was a lot harder, and yet the answer is always no if you don't ask. So you need to get out there. So all of the things you mentioned, you need when you're running, and it is really hard work. You're not going to win if you don't work hard. You can be creative, but at the end of the day, if you don't have the money to buy the lawn signs and to print brochures, you can't get your name out there, and you just have to work really hard.
Perfect. So this kind of incorporates a bit into what you mentioned, Christina. So with this conversation on respect, are we seeing a spillover from the situation in the US, and how? And what can we do to stop it before it spreads, making people, especially women, less comfortable in politics?
You want me to start with that?
Yeah, I'll start with Christina. Sorry, I
I
didn't.
think for sure we're seeing a spillover from the US. I mean, they affect the entire world. And I think there's a long litany of terrible things about their president right now. But one of the worst things that he's doing is forming a complete distrust in government, and authority, and so we're seeing that trickle down and giving people a license to, I mean, if you just look at their campaign, or Trump's campaign, how they speak to people, how they speak to the media, how they debate is incredibly toxic in a lot of ways, because it's angry, it's distrustful, it's all of those things. And of course that has a spillover. So you see it more and more where people just, people will question me, well, build a road, and I have, 10 engineers sign off on the, width of the sidewalk and the water main and all of these things that a general citizen doesn't know anything about. They don't understand where my hydroelectricity is going to roll under the street, but now they're questioning it. And I think that's something new that's happened with this general distrust of government. And it's then it gets people angry, and so it's a whole cycle that I think we have to go back to, making sure that we have integrity within our governments and trust of all levels of government. And that's going to take good people running and making sure that that the integrity is kept in place.
Perfect. Rachel, anything that you noticed while you were running?
Yes. Well, I would say yes, there's huge spillover. And what I noticed, and so we had a municipal, a provincial within 2 weeks, and the American election all happened within 2 weeks in Saskatoon, and then we had the federal election. What I noticed um, is that gender wasn't even talked about. We had some, Saskatoon just got our first female mayor, and they didn't mention it until after the election, that it was even this exciting thing. And so I say that because what is happening is that with all of the other things going on, people kind of say, "Oh, let's not even, there's too much at stake to even worry about representation," right? And that goes for Indigenous candidates, that goes for women, queer, Black, and people of color, right? It goes for kind of that representation in general. They say, "No, we got to deal with the other stuff. We can't deal with that stuff." When in fact, fundamentally, and I'm sure everyone on this panel agrees, fundamentally, we will govern better when we have more diverse people around that table, and we know that. And so that's that's what I've noticed, is that the spillover is that it puts this huge chill on all of the work of increasing representation, and we have seen that in terms of research shows that in order to really tip over so that it's people aren't tokenized in a group, they're actually meaningfully included, you have to be over 30%. Or sorry, after over 1/3, so 33% of representation. So if you have a board, it has to be 4 out of 12, not 2 women in a board of 12 men, but 4 out of 12. And so federally, our numbers, 2025 was 30% women, 2021, 30% women, 2019, 29% women. And so we have plateaued, and we have actually failed to reach that 1/3 mark. And the goal, of course, should be 50% when we're looking at women. But I think it's something that we really need to pay attention to, in that it's not something that can kind of be shelved and let's worry about it later after we get through the serious stuff. It's fundamental to our ability to build more inclusive systems and to, as has been said, to build more inclusive policies.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Looks like we're right at that mark. Did you want to answer, Pam? We got maybe 30 seconds.
No, that's
And
good. I'm
then-
sorry
no,
I had to pop off
No,
there,
that's
but
quite
thank
all
you
right.
for this discussion. It's been great.
Yeah, and I really want to thank everyone for joining us. Thank you so much. Obviously, this is a time where these conversations need to take place. They should be taking place every day, no matter what. But we are seeing so much, and we are being inundated with so much information, misinformation, and we want to make sure that, we are represented as 50% of the population. So I do very much want to thank you on behalf of CFUW. For joining us today. It was a great conversation. We did open the chat again so that everyone could put a couple more comments if you wanted to have a look at everything. But thank you so much. Like I said, on behalf of CFUW, we really appreciate you joining us for our AGM weekend. And again,
Thanks for having me. It was great to see you.
And I just want to remind everybody who's listening out there to make sure when you leave the panel this morning to re-register again for our 12:30 business AGM this afternoon. Looking forward to seeing all of you there. And thank you again, ladies, for a very insightful morning.
Thanks. Have a great conference.